There we go. Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
All right, so tonight's agenda, we're going to have a representative from the DEP here to talk to us, John MacLaine, and he'll be leading off. And then we'll go with the Falmouth Land Trust. We'll talk about some of the activities that they've been doing around the lake and bring a lot of other information as well. Then I'll give you an update on things happening around the lake. And there's some administrative responsibilities that we need to do at each of our annual meetings, which we'll do. We'll share some activities that we're planning this summer and hope that some of you will participate in that. And then at the end, there'll be a little bit different. We always have Q&A session, but this year we're going to ask you, of the things that we're doing, what would you like us to do more of? And of the things that we're not doing, what are they? Help us understand that. So for both people online and people here in the audience, if you could tell us, if it's something that we can do, recognizing that our mission is to preserve and protect the lake. And we try to throw some fun stuff in addition to that, but we do have limits, but we're open to suggestions. So we'd really like to invite you to provide us some additional information. So our first speaker tonight is going to be John MacLaine. I first met John back in, I think, 2018, when we were really starting to crank up some of the changes in ordinance in Windham and Falmouth. We were getting the Highland Lake leadership team together. There was a lot of activity because we were just coming off the blooms, the 4 years of blooms that we had. And John was responsible for this region. He was super helpful. He ran some road maintenance, a road maintenance class for us. And he's hasn't gone too far from that. He's bounced around a little bit, but his main job now is to make sure that he's providing, really first-class training to contractors, homeowners, or anyone who's interested in learning about how to protect waters in the state. So, John? Pointer in the middle. Thanks. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks, Dennis. Hey, everybody. It is a little bit like coming home. I actually used to just live up the road here, and I moved away a few years ago when I got this position. And it's really cool to come back and be talking to folks from Highland Lake. And as Dennis said, I was the grant administrator for the early parts of the 319 process. And so a lot of the work that I've done since then, I've taken over. I run DEP's Non-Point Source Training Center, which is a statewide training center. We travel around. Recently just doubled our staff to 2 people, which is really exciting for me, because now I can go on vacation once in a while. And actually enjoy a lot of these resources that are around the state. So over the last few years, we've been working to improve the training program for contractors. As many of you already know, if you have contractors working near the water, there's a requirement for certification. And so we run the certification program, the training program, and also act as technical assistants for folks and try to help people to implement practices that are good for the lake.
I didn't put any training on his head, but
I'm supposed to be on video too.
Right.
So
Yes.
Hey, everybody online. I do tend, anyone who's been to my classes knows I'm like all over the place. I talk with my hands a lot. So now I have 2 things in my hands and I don't know what to do. And I tend to not stay in the same spot. So I apologize to the people online. Let's see. A lot of the classes that we teach are around erosion control and preventing soil from getting into the water. As you know, with algae blooms, a lot of the food for the algae comes from the land, it comes from the soil, it comes from gravel roads, it comes from runoff. But we also have a lot of specialized kinds of work that happens near the water, things that are happening in the water, shoreline stabilization, gravel roads and development, people rebuilding camps, moving things. So there's a lot of different specialties that tie into the work that we do. And over the last few years, we've been working pretty heavily to update guidance material on shoreline stabilization, not so much on the rule side, but to help support rule changes that have happened over the last couple of years. And so this is the Our Shore program that we've been developing. And what's really interesting to me about this is that it really shows how holistic everything is. Everything is really related to everything else that we do. And so if we touch one thing, that often can make a change somewhere else. And over the years, when we talked about shoreline stabilization particularly, it has been very much how do we protect the shoreline from the energy of waves? And the way we've done it, clearly, many people know, is through using riprap. And up until a couple of years ago, that was the only way that was quote unquote acceptable to help stabilize shorelines in certain circumstances. And so over the last few years, we have been updating material based on new information, some really successful projects that actually didn't use any rock whatsoever in some very high energy systems, but also just helping to share what people have learned so that we can do a better job for the lake when we are stabilizing shorelines. Maine has a wealth of natural resources, right? I mean, you all live around the lake and know how amazing it is to have that resource at your fingertips. But we have thousands of resources that with similar groups and similar issues that you may have. Over the entire state of Maine, we've got about 6,000 lakes and ponds with similar issues, with phosphorus issues, with watershed concerns where soil is getting into the water, as well as shoreline stabilization. We've got about 45,000 miles of rivers and streams in the state, and about 5 million acres of freshwater wetlands, 157,000 acres of coastal wetlands, and about 3,500 miles of coastline. So it was a real task to come up with techniques and tools that fit all of these different scenarios. And I guess part of the a little takeaway here is there are common tools, but there are a lot of very specialized ways that we use them in each of these resources that can help us to be successful in stabilizing shorelines. The way we've done it for years, for decades, for hundreds of years, really hasn't changed very much. You put something heavy in the way of the water and hope the soil stays in place. Anyone who does work or is a contractor knows there are important. It's not just throwing rock at the shoreline. There are certain roles that different kinds of rock and different parts of the design play. And so what we've done with this effort is to really tie it into the way that we're already doing it in a way, but we're giving more alternatives for the different tools in that toolbox. And so the traditional stabilization, we needed to stabilize the toe of a bank to basically prevent undercutting and oversteepening. And we use really large stones there. And we would prepare the slope. So usually grading, and moving soils around to get a certain angle. And we would basically just, no matter what, go in and grade the bank to a certain slope. We also had to deal with groundwater and some of the wave energy making it through stone. So we used geotextiles. Well, the way that we've used that, the way we've done that over the last 40 or 50 years has been used basically a plastic material underneath the stone to allow fines to be retained, but let water out. There are ways that we used to do it years ago. And a lot of these things, which is really interesting for me as a kind of history buff, anyone who knows me knows that I'm into antique tools and I like to restore, old things back to working order. But some of these solutions we had the answers for 100 years ago, and we're now just coming back to like, hey, actually, there was some brilliance in the way that we used to do it. And when we needed to protect the bank itself, we would just put more rocks on the bank. And so there were these different installations of stone and materials in a certain way would accomplish that goal of stabilizing the shore. Over the years, though, we have found out that there are some negatives that go along with doing that. And this is an example, this is a coastal example here. And this is actually showing an area where the red arrows are, where it was riprapped. The areas on the sides of it have not been riprapped. And one of the things that happened following that riprap installation was the loss of the salt marsh in the intertidal. There are some really important habitat benefits that not having a completely sealed off shoreline actually provide. One of them here is the mudflats in the coastal area are actually fed by the eroding banks, and the beaches are as well. So if you don't have that happening, those systems start to malfunction and not work properly. So deflection of energy from rock is one of the concerns, but there's all kinds of other things that many of you already know are really important functions of a shoreline system. And this is really the part where it gets at, this is all tied together. Whether you may think that all of the erosion is purely due to wave energy or ice from the resource, but it's not always the case. There are different ways that erosion is happening. And I love this graph here. And I'll just take a minute to just mention a couple of the items on it. Hopefully you can read it from where you are. But I kind of directly lifted this from a Vermont shoreline manual. And this is a great synopsis of a lot of the research out there looking at the importance of vegetated buffers to the resource, and specifically to certain types of habitat importance or certain functions of that vegetative buffer that help the lake. One of the cool ones, the top one there that's got a red box around it, is shoreland stability. And the research shows that the more vegetation there is from the edge of the resource back out to about 250 feet, which may sound like a familiar number to some folks. The more vegetation there is from 0 to 250 feet, the more stable the shoreline is. Now, there is a minimum amount of vegetation that helps to do that, but the more of that intact area of 250 feet around the resource, the more stable our shorelines tend to be. The more impacted or the more we've changed that area within 250, the less stable we can have those shoreline areas be. But these are also really important. 100 feet for fish and aquatic insect habitat is really the key number for the amount of dense vegetation from the resource to really protect that resource of fish and the things that the fish eat. So these things are all tied together. And as you know, through a lot of the efforts of the association, and you may have participated in these things, that buffer and that vegetation, and the more vegetation you have in the watershed, is what prevents the nutrients from getting through the system. They're caught up, they're sequestered, they're captured, they're transformed in some cases into non-toxic things. So healthy soils, healthy vegetation around lakes are some of the most important things we can do to prevent issues from occurring, because they are the natural filters for the lake and help to prevent that phosphorus from building up and therefore causing algae, increasing algae blooms. Some of the factors that we are now providing some guidance on beyond just put a bunch of stone on the shoreline is to really look at where the erosion's coming from. And so there is an assessment piece of this that does take a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of time to understand. And we are working on, it should come out in the next, I keep getting told that it'll be next week that it comes out. And that's been like 3 weeks of this, but we do have a new guidebook. It's about 100 pages of practices and assessment techniques and tools to actually get to the bottom of what's causing your issue on your shoreline. But it is what we do on the land, and it's the overland water that moves across the bank and goes over it. It is the height of the bank itself and the slope of that bank that will add to some of that instability. It's the presence of groundwater. It is whether there's undercutting from wave energy or ice. And then sometimes when we look at the wave and ice, there are things that are in our toolbox that aren't direct protections of the shoreline. I often tell contractors there's two ways that we can deal with erosion. You can protect the soil from the energy of the water, which is what we've done, or you can change the energy or the velocity of the water so it doesn't move as many particles around. And so some of these techniques actually involve doing some things in the resource, sometimes to diffuse the wave energy before it hits the bank. And I'll show you some examples of that. So the new method does do the same thing that we've done before, but now provides some alternatives to just standardized stone. But there are two new considerations that we've added. One just being, what is the habitat? So habitat's really important. It is one of the functions of that vegetation does besides stabilization. It is the 80% of our wildlife species use the area next to resources as travel highways. At some point in their life cycle, they're using those areas. That's the majority of our wildlife. And so to provide something back, even though it may not 100% of the time be a stabilization element of the design, we can add habitat back, including when we use riprap. And I'll show you a couple examples where folks have actually gone back in and made the riprap disappear. And over time, nature just basically reclaims and it looks like any other natural portion of shoreline. And the second piece that we're adding as a consideration is, what are the land use contributions from to that instability? It doesn't make any sense to just deal with the erosion from wave energy if half of the erosion is actually tied to what we're doing on the land as well. So you have to kind of look at this in a more holistic way, I guess, is the way that we are providing this guidance, that we want to fix all the things that are adding up to instability and also make sure that we can put something back so that our fish and wildlife have what they need for their lives. So when we think about shoreline habitat, it's always been a really amorphous kind of concept, like, oh, it's just, that's where the critters live. Well, there are very important things that we can actually break these down into more minute, discrete problems to solve. And so some of the things that happen when we place stone or remove, or do some project on the shoreline is that we lose some of the shading. And shading is really important for keeping water temperatures cool, which is also important for keeping algae levels down. That aquatic shade and near shore habitat consideration, things that, vegetation overhangs the shore, and that provides some inputs for the bugs and the things that fish feed on. Putting back a cover that is walkable, right? So, we think about think about a salamander moving across the landscape. If you have large stones with huge voids, they're going to fall in the abyss. And so thinking about the things that are going to be using these areas and what is that surface going to look like to them? Is it something they can continue to move across like they did before you did the project? Most of our freshwater streams and rivers are devoid of woody material inputs. We've been very efficient at forestry and other things. And if you look at a natural system, a lot more woody material makes it in, which is what feeds the primary production. The bugs that, once again, the fish eat rely on woody materials getting into those resources. So there's basically a whole chapter on laying out what kinds of practices can be used to put this habitat back that may not even be related directly to the stabilization effort, but they tie into creating a project that naturalizes back quicker than if you just left it as stone. There's been some research that shows that depending on the design type, it can take 50 or more years before that actually naturally matches the surrounding vegetation again. And that's a long time to be losing that function for the critters and the other things that really need these resources too. We also do focus on what things can be done to prevent the land use side of these impacts. Now, these can be done whether or not, whether you're doing a project for stabilization or not. These will help your shoreline stability. But over the years, I've had a lot of chances to see some pretty you know, I don't want to say completely egregious, but things that you're just like, wow, that has caused a lot more issue than it was solving. And one I've seen a lot is dumping brush over the bank, thinking, oh, we're putting some stuff to cover over the soil. And sometimes that can actually kill whatever vegetation remains and make it more erodible. Thinking about how your access ways, do you have an uncontrolled access where there's 50 feet where everybody can just scramble down the bank, or is there a defined place to get down to the water? All those kinds of things are fairly simple, but they can be some of the root causes of the very obvious erosion we're seeing. Also things like using, when you have stairways down to the water, there's shading underneath that, which does kill the vegetation. So using practices like infiltration steps. I don't know if anyone in here has infiltration steps or seen them, but building them into the bank can actually help them to allow those natural vegetation communities to continue. So we're kind of looking at where's the water coming from and how can we slow it down? How can we spread it out? How can we get it absorbed by that natural system around the lake? So we've come up with a bunch of these practices in just looking at how do we preserve the vegetation and enhance it? Those are going to add some elements. Thinking about how our house and roof runoff might be directed or affecting that shoreland area. Thinking about our driveways, roads, and other impervious surfaces. Roadways, and especially our ditches, how those outlet can carry a lot of material to the lake, and they can also bring a lot of high velocity water that can cause issues. And you may see at some of those lakes or some of those streams, right? You see a delta out into the lake where a lot of sediment has sort of dropped out there. Thinking about our pathways and access ways, how can we stabilize those better? Covering up bare soils with erosion control mix, different mulches. I'm a big fan of using mulch, and organic woody materials, especially on areas that we're walking on a lot, can help to prevent those from becoming a channel for water to get right to the lake. And this R-shore concept is really looking at all the sources that are causing this issue and trying to deal with them in their own right. But really that in the end, we're trying to use the least amount of intervention and disturbance necessary, because the more we mess with these shoreland areas, the more other downstream effects. I probably shouldn't have used the word downstream effects, but the more that these effects can transfer to other areas, and then we end up having to try and fix that problem later too. And then the second thing being, we want these shorelines to function as natural systems as quickly as possible. As I mentioned, it can take 50 years for rock to naturalize, or maybe never if it's continually, people are weeding it and pulling vegetation out. But even riprap can be vegetated in ways that make it disappear to the life. And so you have good stability, but you still have the vegetation elements, which are really, really important. I have a couple examples. This is a coastal project. So is it like a moderate wave energy area. This is in the Blue Hill area. And this is one of the projects actually that shifted the focus for DEP from riprap. Now these types of practices have been talked about for decades, really. I look back at my early career and I was like, we were talking about these things in the late 1990s. And it wasn't until last year that you could do anything below the normal high water of a lake or coastal, in a tidal area that wasn't rock. Woody material, now there have been changes that allow for anything that is biodegradable, anything that is natural origin, and that includes woody materials, living materials. You're now allowed to use all of those things at our disposal. We've sort of opened up the toolbox of the possible tools. This is just a project that utilized very cleverly some storm damaged trees, created some, this is a small tow marsh. So basically recreating a marsh at the base of the bank, which has now recolonized this whole area with clams. They were devoid. They did a survey before this project. There were no clams. They put these marshes back in. It's full of clams again now. So just thinking about how that habitat impact is related and how we can utilize the tools that we already have around us can be really, really helpful to these systems in the long term. This is a couple more from that same project, using a lot of common materials we see. You can see some rock to hold back down some of the fabrics, and utilization of a lot of natural materials, and retaining of stumps where trees had to be cut. So it really, they didn't grade anything on this site. It really was just working with what was there. I think I skipped. So as part of this research, it's been really, we talked to a lot of people, and there has been some reluctance to say like, oh, well, I'm just not going to move away from rock because, there isn't anything as strong as that. And in the erosion control world, we use a strength metric called the shear strength of the soil, and what things, different practices have good shear strength. And this is a table. This is actually goes back quite a ways as well. But a couple of things that I had pulled off of here for shear strength. This is like the amount of energy that is imparted on that soil for it to move. And 12-inch rock riprap there has a shear strength of 4 pounds per square foot. And 6-inch riprap has a strength of 2 pounds per square foot. But if you look at sod, look at that ideal sod, dense sod, that's basically mature sod. That's stronger than 6-inch riprap. Now, the trick is, how do you get the grass strong enough for it to do that same job? That's been the hardest part. And so it really is about using companion practices and also linking vegetation with existing practices to make them stronger. You can actually enhance, if you add vegetation to that 6-inch riprap, it actually doubles its strength. So utilizing these practices where it's not just bare rock, where we are integrating roots and different vegetation systems into them, are actually the next level up. We sort of think of vegetation as the weak side and rock as the strong side. And then, in the middle must be this sort of hybrid, but it really is that it's additive. If you add vegetation to structural practices, they get stronger than they would be on their own. A couple examples here of some of the practices that we've been seeing. So one being in this upper left, we've got just sort of the example of where we used all rock and then used some minimized practices to not use as much stone in that coastal setting there. That's in Casco Bay. And then this one here is actually utilizing root wads, and that's one of the coolest things that I've been seeing contractors utilize, because it actually catches sediment versus deflecting wave energy and moving it somewhere else. So a lot of those areas, especially on rivers where they're being used, the diffusion of energy through all the root system actually collects sediment, so that it reverses the erosion. So it no longer is just protecting the soil against the energy of water. It has changed the energy of the water that is hitting the bank, so it doesn't erode, and it actually starts to accrete or build up sediments. And then the one at the bottom there, that's a coastal example of the gentleman, Wilkinson Ecological, has been doing a lot of these using different coconut materials because it is extremely long-lived. Like, they're getting, in some cases, 5 to 10 years out of this biodegradable material. And they're finding actually that they're able to get these to stay in high energy V zones on the coast. There is some significant anchoring that goes with them, so it's not just like putting it on the soil and walking away. But it's really interesting to see the innovation happening out there, and this is a big one of our efforts, is to sort of build upon that innovation and get people utilizing these tools in different ways that maybe haven't been thought of in the past. So this is kind of laying out the methodology for our manual and sort of these different. Every time I have this slide, I always kind of have this joke in my brain about how we love to come up with words to represent whatever we're working on. So we have to come up with some sort of name with it, but it does stand for all the different pieces that we're trying to assess and select tools for, and help people to understand what's newly available to them. Definitely thinking about the ways that we use vegetation within these examples. Sometimes it can be just completely vegetation. This is an example from Canada where there's a big slope failure on a lake. They couldn't actually get any equipment in whatsoever, so they rappelled down with climbers and put in live stakes, which are dormant cuttings of native plants that will root themselves in. So they put about 10,000 cuttings on this bank, and the subsequent pictures show the second and third year of that installation. And there was no ability whatsoever to get any sort of equipment to this site. One of these, I won't tell you which one, is from a previous life of mine that I may or may not have been directly involved in the installation of. And this is really just to highlight that there are ways to naturalize and protect these shorelines that can actually be more effective. And so I'll ruin it for you. It's the one on your right so I worked on this project. It was 2 miles of stabilization. And what's interesting is the background of that photo was done a year and a half after the foreground. And we went back it was about 8 years after the installation, and that's what it looks like. None of that vegetation that's even here was planted. It all came in naturally because the conditions were right for it. These are some other projects that we've been seeing lately. DOT has really embraced this kind of concept, which is awesome to see. And so around resources, especially, they've been using a technique of infilling riprap with soil, essentially, in the upper parts where it's not exposed to wave energy, so that it can vegetate in. And this is a site over a 2-year period where they've restored that riparian area around it, even though they did use an extensive amount of rock. It just has disappeared. And this is an example of, this is from Farmington. This is on the Sandy River. This is a severe embankment failure on the outer, the outer bank of the river, where it goes in a pretty tight corner. And so that whole bank collapsed. And this photo that you see here on the right, that's about 6 years after it. They basically used all root wads and woody material along with plantings to restore this area. And we've gone back, and it actually, you can't see any of it anymore. It's just disappeared essentially from sight. It's completely natural looking. But if they had come in and rip-wrapped it like they originally thought they were going to do on this site, it would still be exactly the same as when they left it. So really, a lot of what we've been working on is trying to help people naturalize these projects, and not necessarily say this is the type of project you need to do, but here are the tools that we have at our disposal, and here are the goals we have to not only stabilize, but to make sure that these systems do have the appropriate habitat and they don't cause issues for us and our kids to deal with in the future. I have a couple other photos from that project, just so you can sort of see this little bit of the scale of what they were doing here, using root wads, and that has all captured sediment at this point. It's sort of built back up in those areas. They built the road down, so it's definitely a significant project, but did not have any deflection downstream or other things and causing issues to other property owners that is normally a concern on rivers, especially with that riprap. So I will finish it up. Hopefully I'm still on time, doing all right. I do apologize. I'm used to talking for like 8 hours at a time. So whenever I have to speak for like 20 minutes or something, it's like, ooh, I don't know. That makes me nervous. But I should also just let everybody know that, so my role is for training, but I do provide technical assistance to folks. I don't work in the regulatory side of DEP. So I may not be able to answer your permit specific questions. However, I have been around and done sort of all the jobs to this point. So a lot of these things that are common, I can probably help you out with a fairly easy answer to things. But if I can't, then I can get you in touch with an appropriate staff person at DEP who can answer the questions for you. So I guess with that, I will, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes.
The erosion that happened in the storm of January 24th, we have and I know we did receive federal monies for that, but have these techniques been used for the erosion that happened on the islands? And even the underground of the state park? I mean, they lost like Shield Pass.
Yeah. So the question was, and especially for the folks at home as well, related to the winter storms a couple years ago, if we're seeing these techniques being used, and absolutely we are. Now, it does take time for permitting to catch up with the reality on the ground. And so a lot of those early projects, they were just like, let's get in here with rock. But as some of these other projects that are in need of stabilization have come through or gone to consultants and things, a lot of these practices that we have been highlighting have been getting integrated into these. Even when it is a riprap project, we're seeing much more buffer installation going along with it. So part of that is that there are new standards related to establishing buffers when using riprap. But that has helped to speed up the stabilization even when they're sort of doing more traditional techniques. I also should mention that one of the other cool things that is back on the table, and I alluded to it with the plastic geotextile, but now you can use some of the historical techniques that we used that people are using, including using gravel layers instead of fabric to sort of allow water in and out, but keep the soil in place. Use of biodegradable filter fabrics that kind of last for 2 or 3 years until the vegetation community can really take over that role. And then also living material. So use of live stakes under riprap as a filter layer that creates a web of roots. And then those kind of shoot up through the rock over time too. Yes. Yes. So coconut core, the fiber from coconut, they make into blankets, and they make it into these logs that are just solid fiber coconut. And those can be used with different anchoring devices to sort of tie them to the ground. And so some of these are really, really big and need machines to move them, but some of the blankets and they're almost like erosion control socks, if you're familiar with those. They're kind of like a tube that's just full of coconut material. And they last an incredibly long time, they're one of the strongest fibers that are available for this purpose, but also they have really long lasting qualities to them. Yes. Yes, sorry. I can't see your name.
I live on Highland Lake, we've grown overlook off of the and I've been there for a little over 31 years. And I'm an avid swimmer. I came from the ocean and scuba diver for 30 years there. And I love being in the water. I can't wait to get in there. I've always, up until this year, I've been able to get in on the 23rd of May.
Mm-hmm.
This year it was so cold. I've never seen it that cold at that time since I've been there. But my real reason for being here tonight is the first time I've been to one of these meetings a long time ago. I don't think it was the quite a while back ago, I started seeing this green algae that would kind of roll. The way I've described it to a few people, and they understand, but I don't know how else to describe it. When I first started seeing it, it was like a toy that a little child would have. It had like a coil that they could climb in one side and go crawl across and come out on the other side. And it was like that. It was transparent at first. And I could actually watch it going like this and heading out into the water.
Was it Nessie?
Sorry?
Was it Nessie? No, it was Loch Ness Monster. No.
but I wasn't bothered by it.
Yep.
I could have swam right through it if I wanted to tear it up, but I wasn't interested in it. You know, but now it's like there's big clumps of it everywhere, and then for the first time this past week, I was snorkeling and it's very close to shore where we get in and out of the water, and it's black. I mean, and I have one of, I don't know if you know what a military shovel looks like. It's
Yep.
wood from here to here, and then it's got a adjustable head on it, so you can point it in whatever direction you want. And when I came, I was trying to help a friend who had lost her horns. I found one of them, and I got that one back, and then I found the other one, another one, and it was getting all covered too, further up to the North Point a little bit from where I started. And that was getting really murky every time I touched it with the shovel, but my shovel was too wide to try to pull up on it. So anyways, I had to leave the area and slowly pull back and let it off. And when I came over there, it was like maybe from here, not even to the end of this file. But I noticed there was this big black rock. Now, that's weird. I've never seen a big black, good size black rock that close to shore or that close to the dock. So I took my shovel head and I went like this, and I went down and I pulled it back, and it just it was so disgusting. I have not gone back in the lake since. And I really don't care if I never go back there again, but I do care. You know, I've been there for almost 32 years.
Yeah.
September. And I've never been grossed out so bad as my.
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what the, algae was that was the culprit in your case. No, I don't. I'm not an expert in algae species, but I mean, certainly algae is a natural part, but when we get a lot of nutrients, when we get a lot of things that it can affect growth of those things. But that said, I don't, it could have been dislodged from somewhere else. And, usually you need to figure out what the species or what the algae is that's causing the issue. And you can sort of backtrack what might be causing it.
Get a test or something.
Maybe that's a perfect segue for Dennis.
I'll get back to your question in just a moment, but as I shared at the beginning, John has been real helpful. Got to get back in the screen. John has been real helpful to Highland Lake in the past, and he's agreed to come join us again this year, where we did a road walk last year that was really helpful, I think, with the town engineer from Wyndham, and where we could look at issues with the people from that road association or any other road association, take a look at it and see what are the best solutions that we could do for that. And John has agreed to do that with us this year, and there'll be a notice going out to the whole membership telling you when that will take place, which road, and when it will take place this year. But we do have a green filament-based algae in the lake, and as John said, it's very common. And I've got some around my dock. I haven't seen black, but what I read about it just in the last couple of days is that two things can trigger it in freshwater lakes. One is having a fair amount of runoff in the spring. We had a fair amount of runoff this year, and I'll show you some slides later. And then high temperatures. And we had both of those. We've got the perfect storm for that kind of algae to grow. It's not toxic. It's made up of little filaments, and there's a simple test that in the article I saw called the stick test. And you put a stick through it, and if it sticks to it and it's kind of stringy, it's non-toxic. If it just stirs and the water all around it turns the greenish or greenish blue or something, then it might be toxic. So everything that I've seen so far in the lake and from all the testing that we've done over the years is we have the filament type. But the black is something that I have not seen. Yeah. So it's something we'll take a look at, and our expert on that is Keith Williams. He's not here tonight, but if you'll give me a contact information after the meeting and where you live, we can, when Keith comes back, maybe we can have him go out and take a look.
That'd be great, I appreciate that, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions for John?
Can I make a plug real quick?
Sure.
You mentioned gravel roads, nearby, so at, out in Bridgeton, in a couple weeks, we're gonna be doing a gravel road maintenance workshop, so anyone is welcome to come to that. You sign up through the Lakes Environmental Association. I think it's August 15th, I want to say. Don't hold me to that. It's you know, a couple weeks into August, I believe.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is a question for the whole audience, but it may be, we have a lake house on Highland, probably built in 1950, and there's a wall that goes right down to the water's edge, built of rocks with grout between the rocks, and along the bottom, a chunk of it is starting to come apart. And I'm just wondering, are there people who do that kind of repair? Are there solutions for that?
Yeah, so certainly anyone doing work near the water that involves potential soil disturbance does need to be somebody that is certified by DEP to do that kind of work. So we do keep a list online. I know there are some members members of the association that are on that list. You can replace and repair structures that are continuing to function as they were intended. So yeah, you are allowed to repair those things as long as they're typically not expanded beyond their original size. And a permit is typically necessary when you go over 50% replacement or repair of that structure. But if it's less than that, if it's just like a little bit of, put a rock back and put some concrete back in to hold it, that's typically considered maintenance and repair, doesn't require permitting. And then you can also replace those things with different types of structures that aren't walls, but you are allowed to replace walls in kind, and the person doing the work typically, if it's a contractor, would have to be certified.
If you would reach out with your left hand and point towards that screen, you'd be pointing at one certified contractor on the lake that is excellent. So Jeff Wyman. So, okay. We have one more question.
Probably any walking path that goes down to lake, in which it tends to get worn down after a while and get low vegetation. What's happening to it?
So for those online, the question is for walking paths going down to the lake that finally get worn down. I think you were asking what's the proper repair for those?
So typically we recommend use of erosion control mix, which is a certain type of woody mulch that's, more stringy. And that can be done, that can be done really effectively in just covering that pathway if it does start to get beaten down and it gets exposed. There are other materials you may be allowed to use, but town by town, there may be restrictions on like something like crushed stone on that. But organic materials like a mulch would be our #1 recommendation. If there is like flow down the pathway, we might also recommend putting in like water bars or ways to get the water pushed off back into the woods or back into a vegetated area to get it off of the path. But generally, my #1 recommendation is to use erosion control mix on paths, and it kind of mimics the same function that the forest duff layer does. It kind of works in the same way, to absorb some of that water and prevent it from running off in a high energy form.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Now, I have to apologize. I know a lot of you people, but for those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Dennis Brown. I am president of the Highland Lake Association. And again, welcome here tonight, but I thought I'd at least tell you who I am if you can't read my name tag from where you are. So next up, we're going to have Mila Plavsic. She's the executive director of the Falmouth Land Trust. I looked at her bio and she's been to grew up in some in Maine, some in Vermont. She went to UVM, graduated from there, or was at Yale, was at Cambridge University, and has done work in Africa. She's been a professor. She's done just about all of it, but decided to come back to Falmouth, Maine, and take over leadership of the Falmouth Land Trust. And she's done some great work protecting some of the properties around Highland Lake. So we thought we'd give her a chance to tell us something of what she's been up to.
Thank you, Dennis. All right.
We need to just that you know.
Yeah, just
That's it.
okay. There we go. Great. Thank you. Yep. All right. Yeah, so thank you all for this invitation. I'm going to chat with you a bit, really going off of some of the themes that John has mentioned, and maybe thinking in a little bit bigger scale, maybe a little bit further away from the lake. But as you all know, things that happen on the land definitely impact the lake. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the Falmouth Land Trust for those who aren't familiar with their organization, and talk for a brief second about smart growth in the lake, and also just touch on invasive terrestrial plants and the lake, because I know there's been a lot of work done in Maine's lakes looking at aquatic invasives, but the terrestrial invasive plants can also be an issue to keep in mind, and also just point out a couple things along the way that we could use some help with from the community around Highland Lake. So to jump right in, just giving a quick overview of the Falmouth Land Trust. We are an organization that does quite a bit of outreach and education in the community, and we also obviously conserve land for both the enjoyment of people through trails, but also for the benefit of our fish and wildlife and other critters. Just to take a quick step back, what is a land trust? There are a lot of land trusts in Maine. There are over 80. We have, I think, probably the highest density of land trusts, just given our land use history and how we had a lot of private land and a lot of interest in conservation. And so a lot of communities created nonprofit land trusts in the 1970s and 80s. They were mostly all volunteer run, some still are. And our organization has started out that way. And just in the past 10 years or so, we've added a few staff. So what we're doing is we are acquiring land and conservation easements to preserve natural areas, waterways, and in our case, we also deal, we own one farm, but most of our land is forested. And we were founded in 1981. And actually this acreage number is going up already. We are up to over 2,800 acres under our care generally. It's spread over a lot of properties because, as you're well aware, Southern Maine has very small parcels. We're not like Central or Northern Maine where you can do a conservation deal for 10,000 acres. We're dealing more in the 30 to 40 acres, 50, 60 acres if we're lucky at a time, but trying to piece things together so that they are connected over time. Obviously, we're only dealing with willing donors, willing sellers, and we're very grassroots. We don't get much in the way of state or federal funding. We're really a local community organization. And I just wanted to quickly touch on the success that the state of Maine has had through all of these land trusts, that we now collectively, all these land trusts are protecting twice as much land in Maine as all the state parks and open space, other types of open space put together. So I think that's a testament to, groups, much like the Highland Lake Association, a lot of these land trusts were just community members getting together saying, hey, what can we do here? And they've had a lot of success in that. So looking at what the core of our land trust does, and I should point out that, as I mentioned, this is what most land trusts do. And some of you in the audience, if you don't live in Falmouth, if you live in Wyndham or Westbrook, your territory is actually covered by the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, which some of you are very familiar with. They're our partners. They do things, fairly similar to us. And I'll be sticking around afterwards. So if you have any questions, or, I'm happy to connect you with them as well. But, yeah, in general, these land trusts are looking at the conservation values when they're evaluating a property, and looking at that connectivity. Does it connect to already conserved open space, or is there a possibility in the future? And again, just trying to do our part to contribute to smart growth. That, we're not anti-housing, we're not anti-anything. We're just saying, can we do this in a way that allows us to have additional housing and amenities, and also allows those people to have access to natural areas that are still fairly complete and functional. So we are mainly dealing with two kinds of acquisitions: a fee acquisition, or the acquisition of a conservation easement. So I'll start with just a quick description of these fee acquisitions. So that's where the Falmouth Land Trust ends up owning the parcel. So obviously, we love it when people donate land to us. I mean, we had that happen last year. Someone just came into the office and said, I want to donate 25 acres that's next to one of your already conserved properties. And we said, great, thank you so much. That's amazing. But we can also work with owners who may not be in a position to donate land. They need to retire and move away. They need to make sure they have an inheritance to leave for their kids, or, we're happy to work with other owners as well. Where a lot of times people offer us bargain sales, which is amazing. They're not looking to maximize their profit return, but they need to get something out of it because they made a big investment. We understand that. So, if you can give us a discount on the land and give us a little time to raise that money, great. And then I should also just point out, we will do fair market value sales. That just takes us a little longer because we are a very tiny community run, nonprofit. We are not sitting on a pile of money. But we can try to go after grants, we have, a few donors in town who like to support these kinds of things. We just need a little lead time. So I just want to make sure that people know that, because I think for a lot of land trusts in Maine, because we started out as small community run organizations, and we really did only take donations at first, because we didn't have a way to raise a lot of money. But we've worked on our capacity in that front. The other main way that we conserve land is through conservation easements. So if you think of your property as a bundle of property rights, like a box of pencils, and you want to retain the right to expand your house or build a garage, but then maybe you have 10 acres in the back that you're willing to leave the way it is, and you would, in the future, you'd like to make sure that land isn't turned into additional housing or other uses. That's where a conservation easement will come in. So you retain ownership, but it won't be developed in perpetuity. So we deal with those a bit as well. And this map, by the way, is taken from the Nature Conservancy. This is just a rough approximation of how developed the land is. So that gray around Portland is, pretty developed. Yellow and brown are somewhere in the middle. And those green areas are the places that are still fairly in a natural state. And that's where, we tend to focus some of our conservation efforts. And we'll look at a better map in a minute. few of the things that we do, once we have the property, I like to say that perpetuity is a long time. So managing this land, stewarding it, ensuring that those conservation values are maintained. We do spend a lot of our time, because we have a lot of smaller properties that are often surrounded by abutters, neighbors. We just need to make sure that people understand where the boundary is and they're not dumping their grass pile onto our property and those kinds of things, which can take a bit of time, but it's important to do in the long term. And we're really working to be even better stewards of the land because, I think when a lot of these land trusts got started, the land was in a reasonably natural state and you could just kind of leave it alone and it would be okay. And we're finding that's not quite the case anymore, at least in southern Maine, mainly because of those terrestrial invasive plants. And we also have invasive pests and a few other things. And we're finding that with drier summers and, other things going on, it's just becoming, we need to pay a bit more attention and try to get some resources towards, some forestry and other management activities. So here's a picture of some scouts who are helping us plant some native plants after we removed a bunch of invasive plants. So there's just, more to be done on that front. And we also find with our land trust that it's important to reach out to the people in the community. We get kids out, we get adults out. We've got so many different programs and events. You can check out our website. We all of our walks and events are open to the public. Most of them are free. So we definitely encourage you to get engaged with us if you are not already. And we just do a lot of outreach with the schools and mostly in Falmouth, a little bit in Portland. And then partner with other land trusts with some of the things that they're doing. And we're also on a kick right now to get our 55 miles of trails in Falmouth into better shape and then also easier to navigate, just in terms of being able to find these places, be safe on the trails, find your way around, that sort of thing. And what we're also trying right now, because we've realized that a lot of our trail mileage, and this is true across the state of Maine, a lot of it was put in by volunteers who didn't know all of these erosion control techniques that John was referring to earlier, because we have the same issues on our trails, especially if we're on a slope. If a lot of times volunteers would put, what's the shortest point between point A and point B? It's straight line. And so they, and we've seen this with anybody who's been hiking in Maine, you're often scrambling up the rocks to get to the top, as water is flowing down the trail. That is not how that trail started out. If they had put in some switchbacks, it would take you maybe half as much time to get to the top these days. So, we're really struggling with that. We recognize that we are part of the problem. We are contributing to the erosion that is going into our brooks and going into Highland Lake and going into Casco Bay. So we've launched a Trail Legacy campaign. We're trying to raise some funds to start using the gravel and the other materials and the drainage to try to get some of the erosion out of, under control, and also just make it a more pleasant experience. I mean, nobody wants to walk on this left-hand side photo when you're out hiking. So just wanted to touch on, some of our recent land successes, as it were, in the Highland Lake area. This is Babbage Woods. On that map, it's up there in red near Highland Lake. This was something that the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership had ranked years ago, like over a decade ago, flagged this as being, one of the top 25% highest value areas in the watershed. And so we were able to conserve that in May. So thank you. I know a number of the people in this room donated to this, so we really appreciate that. This was really a community effort to again, help by safeguarding, if we safeguard this brook and it's flowing through a natural forest and wetland, it's going into Highland Lake much cleaner. than it would otherwise. So we appreciate that help. So, I'm just kind of whizzing through here, but I will stick around. I'll be here at the end as well if anybody has any questions. But I did want to just touch on this idea of invasive terrestrial plants being an issue for the lake. And just make sure that everybody's aware, because I was not aware of this until recently, that the Northeast is really at risk of these invasive shrubs. Like globally, we are very at risk. It's hard to be afraid of shrubs, but here we are. Because they can get so thick that the trees can't regenerate. It's quite amazing what they can do. And just because of where we're situated and what our where the Southeast has a lot of invasive plants that are moving north. So things to keep an eye on. I'm sure some of you are familiar with these. I call these the 7 to start with. These are not the only invasive terrestrial plants in Maine or even around Highland Lake, but these are some that some people have in their yards. And if you can figure out, if you can identify them or have a friend help you identify them and take them out and replace them either with nothing, because hopefully something native will come back, or with a native plant. Maine Audubon over at Gilson Farm now has a beautiful native plant center. Recommend checking it out if you haven't already. But if this is something that you hadn't really been thinking about in terms of Highland Lake, I will just point out that these plants can have negative impacts on bank stability, on the nutrients that are going into the lake, and on the hydrology. And I would especially call out the Japanese knotweed. That's something that I know a lot of people at the state are concerned about. A lot of municipalities are starting to worry about. Individual homeowners in the United States are starting to worry about this. This will go through your foundation that they've already in the UK. It's already reducing property values if you have it on your property. So yeah, look for Japanese knotweed. I have seen it about 50 feet from the lake shore and the Falmouth side of the lake. So it's there, and I would just recommend getting on top of it earlier than later, because it's going to be a multi-year effort. You may never fully eradicate it, but the sooner you start, the better the chance you have. Fortunately, the rest of these guys are much easier to deal with. And we have resources on our website. I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants more information about removing invasives. The other thing that I wanted to ask for your help with, really, in addition to looking for those invasive plants, is just to think about, do you or does someone maybe have some acreage? We're looking at mostly over 20 acres is where we get interested, and to fill in some of these gaps. So the darker green on this map is the land we've already conserved, which is fantastic. And again, this is thanks to the communities all around the lake that have helped with this. And this doesn't even show Beverage Woods yet. That would add another dark green. But these lighter green areas are these existing undeveloped, unprotected habitat blocks. And it would be just wonderful for the health of Highland Lake to conserve a bit more of this land. And again, we work with any partner who's willing to work with us. So if you have any leads or anybody you'd like me to talk to, I'd be happy to do so. So with that, I will ask if you have any questions, and if you want to scan the QR code, that'll take you to our website. And thank you very much. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Something that I guess a lot about is every spring we end up with an awful lot of leaves that come from the north end of the lake, and they settle right in our beach way where the water, where you meet the water. And I'm wondering if maybe I could think there's another. I know there's a dam at the south end. And I think there's one up on Viney Mill that must go somewhere to come back down through here, back down through the Overland area. Not sure where it is, I've not seen it, but, I know there's one on Viney Mill, so I know there's gotta be waterway that's comes from that area. I was wondering, instead of, like, last year, when the weather was still absolutely beautiful and everybody had their boats still in the water. All of a sudden, we get up the next morning and all the water's gone. The boats are up on, in the mud. And, not a lot, but some of them were. And I was wondering if there's any other way than just opening the gate down on the south end. Have a time with all of this water connection that's coming from up Barney Mill ways, wherever it's coming from. If we get it all at the same time, wouldn't that end up working out a little better, don't you think? Or I really don't know. I don't have the answer. That's why I'm asking.
I'm not sure what your question is.
When you open the dam down on the south end,
It's never opened.
it's not.
It's not. There's a small amount of water that goes through the fishway that we manage, the Highland Lake Association manages, but the dam, the major gates on the dam haven't been opened for decades.
There's something to do with that.
And I'll talk.
I've always opened on the south end because the leaves from way up on the north end, they are all right there at our entrance to the water from the land to the water.
I think that's primarily wind driven, because the wind will set up currents within the lake.
I mean, it'll happen overnight.
Right.
So I don't
Okay.
confusing. Last year, it was very noticeable. I mean, like, everybody still had their boats in the water. And the next day, there was no water.
I watch the water very closely. I have a gauge by my dock, and it doesn't change that quickly. But Mila, thank you very much. And I did have a little appreciation.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Okay, we're running a little bit longer, so I'm going to give you a pretty fast update. And this very first slide is about water levels. And so this year we're the red line. And you can see, let's see, 25 was the light blue. I must have hit the wrong button here. Okay. Fat thumb. The light blue line was last year, and you can see how the water was up pretty well at the beginning of the year, and then everything was so dry that it just brought us down pretty far. The worst year that, since we've been measuring, this is only the last 5, was 2022. And from the peak that we had here to here was a difference of 29 inches of water in the lake. I mean, obviously it only lasted for a few days, but the water goes fairly gradually. Some of the lines are choppy, but that's more from how frequently we took the readings. But we're required to release a certain amount of water from the lake constantly. For most of the year, it's 2.8 cubic feet a second, but only when the alewives are coming in, it's 5.6 cubic feet. Other than that, if the water comes up, it goes over the dam, and we don't have any control of that. So, that's part of it. But you can see that we've had up until just a few days ago, we were still at the dam level. So this is 0. This is the dam level. So when we get down here 10, 12, 13 inches below the level, we find a lot more rocks in the lake with our props. So this year, the black there was 2023 was great because we were above the dam by of about 4 inches at least the whole year. So that was really good. One of the things we do, probably the simplest test we do for water quality, is to do a Secchi disc. We move this black and white disc, we drop it down into the water on a tape measure, and you go till you just lose sight of it. And you move it up and down till you can just barely see it. And you measure it in meters. And the deeper that is, obviously the clearer it is, and the shallower it is, the worse it is. When you have a bloom, it's 2 meters. So I'm, I'm 6'2", so it's about my height is about as far as you can see that disc. And as some people have said, if you're in water up to your chest, you can't see your feet. So it's a good measure. So here's 5 years worth of Secchi disc readings through the open water season. And again, we're red. So you can see we're the lower it is, the clearer it is. That's the deeper in you can see, okay? So keeping it low is great. And but the more runoff you have, the more sediment that gets washed into the lake, the less clarity you have. And there's more phosphorus that gets dragged in with that. There's more algae that grows and interferes with that clarity. So, but we're catching up to where we have been in the other years. Except for this year, all the others seem to be right at this same point. So that's something that we really watch. This is from the 1970s up until last week. This is the Secchi disc, the water clarity. And every time we take a sample reading, there's a dot on this chart. And you can see that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was getting less clear. The more development that was on the lake, the more material gets washed in, the more we've concentrated the flow. If any of you from Wyndham, when you go to the town hall, look at, as you walk down towards where you're going to go to the town clerk, look at the big diagrams on the wall. It's a diagram of a map, essentially, of the town of Wyndham. And there's a dot where every house is. And it goes from 1920 up until 2020. And you can see in 1920, there weren't a whole lot of houses around the lakes. And each decade, there's more and more and more. And that's what caused a lot of this, because we didn't really understand how we were affecting the water quality. So, but it's hard to learn a whole lot from that. So one of the things that we did is we changed the Y scale so that we could blow it up a little bit and see what was happening. So the curve is the running average over all of those years. And then right about here, and just around 2001, when we shortly after the Highland Lake Association got started, there was real concerns because the lake water quality was failing. And in fact, in 1989, we went on the impaired list for the state, from the DEP. And so the towns adopted some ordinance to try to affect that, to try to keep it from getting worse. And you can see as we go through this, there are other milestones that happen. But here's where we had our algae bloom. But what's really important is you can see how much we've gotten it to go back down. You, the Highland Lake Association, the DEP working with us, Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Land Trust, all of the things that we're doing are making a difference. So we're about to around 1990, about where we are. There's very few lakes in the state that have been able to accomplish that. So here's one on the phosphorus in the lake. And if you look at it, it's pretty similar to the one I just showed you with the Secchi disc. And we have every point that we have on there, and you can see, you can see where the bloom is here. You can see a real cluster of dots up there. That's where you could barely see your feet when you were in water up to your chest. But it was hard to really learn anything from this. So we blew this up. And you can see some significant issues here. My perception, no one else has said this, but my perception is in 1918, after we were coming out of the bloom, I was wondering what the heck is going on? What's new? And one of the things that was new is that alewives came into the lake. And the whole thing with alewives is they bring nutrients from the ocean. 30 to 50% of them die after spawning and leave those nutrients in the lake. And you think, wow, that's bad. But as all of their babies grow and become juveniles, they're absorbing all of that phosphorus and they go back to the ocean. So it balances itself out. But in 1918 was when we started managing the dam. And the reason I got interested in it is because the beavers were plugging it. Yes. 2018. Sorry. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Thank you. My wife helping me. So in 2018, I could see that it was plugged and nobody was paying attention to it. And we talked with Department of Marine Resources and they said, yeah, we try to come by once a month. Well, the fish couldn't get out. And so the longer they stay in the lake, both the adults, they're getting eaten by bass and big pickerel. So all of the nutrients are staying in the lake. They're not going back to the ocean, the ones that were trying to go back. And all the babies were sticking around longer because they couldn't get out and they were getting eaten. So more of the nutrients were staying in the lake. And because the phosphorus is measured in parts per billion, it doesn't take a whole lot to make a difference in the lake. So that was something that I think part of that spike that we're seeing there is partly because the alewives couldn't get out. I'm not blaming the alewives for it. It's because there was no path for them to leave the lake. And the longer they stayed, the more nutrients stayed in Highland Lake. So real quickly, we've talked about a lot of these things about sources of phosphorus, but it's always important to talk about pet waste. That is a huge issue. As we start to deal with the erosion issues, pet waste starts to climb. Another one is lawn care. And I'm going to talk in a moment just about an ordinance that Falmouth just passed that reduces the amount of phosphorus, or fertilizer and pesticides that you can use, but I'll get there in just a moment. And alewives in some cases, which I just covered. So Falmouth prohibits the use of fertilizer and pesticides within 75 feet of the lake. In Falmouth, not Wyndham, but anyone from Wyndham, I would really strongly urge you to consider following some of these guidelines. And from 75 feet to 250 feet, you have to use ones that are not readily water soluble so that the first rainstorm, they don't just rush into the lake. Because anything that makes your lawn green makes the lake green. So anyway, it was passed. And if you want more details on that, please go to the Falmouth website, and they've got a really good explanation on what works or what you can do and what you can't do. But there's solutions for about everything. So here's the alewives. Here's the record of them. Some of these years have zero, and it wasn't that there was zero, it was that nobody counted it. So that's why the number shows zero. But of the ones that we did count, what is pretty interesting is here's where the bloom came. In here in the 2014, 2017, and we were close in 2018, and that had been our high watermark, if you will, the most alewives coming in. And then for reasons we don't know, the numbers dropped down into the 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 range. But then this year we're back up to the 64,000. So it's going to be real interesting to watch what happens as we get to late July, early August is when these blooms hit. There's a lot of things going on. The fishway is open, so the alewives were able to leave. The juveniles don't leave really until August. But it'll be interesting to see. But real quickly, they eat zooplankton. And the zooplankton eats the algae. So if you get millions and millions of additional fish in the lake eating the same zooplankton, you can really shrink the number of zooplankton. But one of the things that the people who are much more expert on it than me have surmised is that the zooplankton that came back, before the alewives were reintroduced, it was 150 years of steady state condition. And then all of a sudden they get introduced. They came in and ate up a lot of the zooplankton. The ones that could recover the quickest are probably now the biggest population of zooplankton, because there's dozens of different kinds of zooplankton in the lake. So it's going to be interesting. Hopefully, we don't end up with any issues from that. This is just obviously a map of the lake with all of the different road associations on it. And the ones in red have a representative on the Highland Lake Association board. The ones in black do not. And it's really helpful if you have somebody from the board in your road association, and they can share some of the things that the board is trying to accomplish in helping the lake. If you don't have anyone and you'd like to have a speaker from the Highland Lake Association, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to come share with you what we know and things that we've learned over the years. I always get a question about the cove on the southwest corner of the lake and what's the status. So I reached out to them, and phase one is the south part of it. They're 60% sold. They've got 13 owners down there, and I've shared this with you before, but that was a pretty contentious project as it got started. But you know what we're going to call the people who moved in there? Neighbors. They're our neighbors. They didn't do this. And so I took a drive in just a couple of weeks ago to see if somebody was outside that I could introduce myself and invite them to the meeting tonight, either online or in person. And it ended up there was a woman sitting on her porch, and we got into a conversation, and ends up that she was about 4 years ahead of me in the same high school, and her husband was my brother-in-law's best friend, and he's vice president of a lake association up near Rumford. So they understand the lake issues and what one needs to do. So it's terrific that we've got somebody within the organization. It's not us telling them, it's one of their own telling them that there are things you need to do to protect the lake. Oh,
Do they have dockage or will
they have a dock. It's in now. It's a permitted dock. And the plan now is that there will be 2 or 3 pontoon boats that will be jointly owned by the association.
Dennis,
Yeah.
I paddled down with that dock last week.
Yeah.
And it's in about 1.5 feet water. It's a very long dock, reaches out.
Yeah.
And then it's completely surrounded by weeds. There's only one little tiny path.
Right.
It's really skinny, so it's gonna be challenging to get a boat out of it.
It'll be really challenging to get a boat out of there. It's 75 feet long, and it's halfway up to your knees
Yeah.
in there. And we're still at relatively high water. If the lake drops another 10 inches, they're not going to, 75 feet won't be enough. But, okay. But just, I got to go back. Just a note, there's a $5,000 bonus if you can find somebody who wants to move in there. So I thought I'd pass that on. I'm hoping that anybody who listens to this that does, I'm going to claim it. Let's see. We have 2 current, I don't know why this is stepping in. We have 2 current grant awards. There's the DEP EPA 319 grants that we was successful in achieving last year for $94,000. We did about half of the work last year. There's about, so we did about $47,000, but there's still, and there's some more planned for this year, but there's still about $9,800 that's projects that we were going to do that we're not going to do. So if anybody has a project that you think is not maintenance, talk to us and maybe we can get something done. It'll have to be a 50-50 share, but it's something worth doing. The other grant that we have is a Wyndham Watershed Protection Grant, and Overlook Road was applied for. I got $7,000 toward a $24,000 project that they're doing, and very, very well presented and accepted by the Natural Resource Advisory Committee in Wyndham, which makes the recommendation to the council who actually approves the grants. And we asked this group last year whether you would be interested in supporting the Highland Lake Association providing a grant up to $3,000 and specifically aimed at hiring a vac truck to help with the cleaning out of settling basins. And we're still working on it. Kevin's been doing a top-notch job. He's got 2 people interested. We got some logistics to figure out how that's going to work, but there are 8 road associations who've expressed interest in participating in that. So we're going to cover some administrative things, and I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as I can because I know we're running late. It's a little bit funky when we come here to talk about our budget because our budget goes on a calendar year, but we have this meeting halfway through the year. So we're really talking about last year, how we did, not necessarily how we're doing this year. So this is last year. And we ended up, we more than met our obligations. This is our contributions that came in, and this is our expenses, actually our budget. We did not spend the $3,000 last year. We weren't prepared for that. There's some possibility we still do this year, but we'll see how that goes. This looks pretty similar. It's the same budget for 2026. We had some front-end loading costs. The only thing that's a little bit out of whack here is this, we're over budget on the water quality testing because all of our testing is done at the University of New Hampshire. And for 2 years, they'd been sending our bills to Windham, New Hampshire. And finally, we were able to figure that out and work with them. So they forwarded the bills. And so we're going to run over this year, but we'll have reserves. Before the meeting, we had not met our budget expectations yet, but we usually get a lot of money at this meeting as well as towards the end of the year. Okay, I'm going to ask Tom Verlee to come up here and go through a couple of administrative things that we need to do.
Great, that's the right arrow.
That's the right arrow in the center.
Thanks so much. My name's Tom Verlee. I'm one of the board directors as well. I just got to say thank you, Dennis, for it's such a pleasure to work with this. I'm not the scientist these guys are, and to see this, what you saw here in the last 5 minutes presents an incredible amount of work, and it's impressive, and it's so I'm just excited to be part of that group. Bylaws. It's important for every organization to update its bylaws periodically and keep them consistent with the way we do business. And so for the last several years, the way we do business here, especially getting a new person invited to the board, is not to necessarily pull them out of the woodwork here at this meeting, but if they're interested, to just attend a board meeting or 2. And if it's a good fit, it's a good mesh, then the president can appoint that person as to fill that term until the election of this year. And so that's what this is all about, is to make sure that our bylaws are consistent with the way we're doing practice. So we published these 4 weeks ago on the email newsletter, and again last week. And the whole key here is to make these consistent. So any vacancy on the board of directors may be filled by appointment by the president with board approval to serve until the next meeting. And we've been doing that now for 4 or 5 years. It's been very successful. You'll see in just a minute when we elect our board members that 2 new board members have come into the system just this way. So the board approved this bylaws amendment. And so the way it works is that it's now submitted to the general membership, not for necessarily discussion. It's called a ratification, just like a states would ratify a congressional amendment, we would ratify a board bylaws amendment. So I will accept a motion to ratify the approved board bylaws amendment as stated. And is there a second? Is there any discussion on that motion? Then all in favor of accepting these bylaws changes, please raise your hand. Any nays? Thanks. That's great. Thanks. This other one is real quick, but real nice. We have 15 members on our board, and certain number of folks, their term expires this year. It's a 2-year term. Kathy Kalman is retiring from her position on the board. And Kathy has been a person on our board and related to us from the get-go. Dennis, is Kathy here tonight? Stand up, Kathy. Thank you. We just got to say thank you so much.
Yeah, Kathy's not only been a board member, she was president of the Lake Association and has been very much involved with understanding what's going on and shaping it from very early on. She shared with me that she was president when the dam went out, and we had a great conversation, and she's got a whole lot of history here, and she's been a great board member. And the rest of the people on this list, I've got to tell you, I've been on a number of boards. This is the best board I have ever been on when everybody does something. And so please raise your hand, everyone who's on the HLA board, raise your hand, because you guys have done a terrific job. I really appreciate everything that you do working with me.
Thanks, Dennis. So Dennis is up for re-election, Pete Simonson, myself, Mark Kinner, Jacques Santucci, and Chad DeRocher. In addition, as I said, over the course of the year, 2 new members have joined us by appointment. Doug Reynolds on Overlook. Doug, can you stand up for us? Thank you. And Tyrell Rowe, is she here tonight?
No, she's not.
Okay. Well, these 2 individuals, as I said, are now following our procedure that the bylaws amendment that we just voted on, and will be up for election now. So you're going to vote for these individuals, and we will accept the motion to elect the slate of board nominees as listed. Is there a motion? Moved. Is there a second? Is there a discussion? Then all those in favor, please, of accepting this slate of officers, and opposed? Thank you. That is it for me. My most important part now is Lauren, who's going to explain just a little bit about what's coming up for activities this summer. Thank you, Lauren. That's the right arrow button. I'll put you up there, Dor.
All right, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you to our speakers tonight. I've just got 2 slides, so I promise I will be very quick. Has anybody participated in any of our events in the past? Show of hands. Some of us. Awesome. Thank you. And I know somebody actually walked in and they were like, where have the events been this year? So I'm glad that you were looking forward to those. Our first event that we'll be hosting this year is our dam paddle. Has anybody been out to the dam? Some of us. Yeah. Pretty cool spot. Dennis usually leads a great tour out to the dam. So Sunday, August 2nd is our slated event day, but in case there is rain or inclement weather, it will be pushed to the next week. We're going to be doing something a little bit different this year. So all of our events will be all of our events will be able to be found from the website, and you can sign up that way. And then we'll be able to more closely monitor our signups and be able to reach out with any notifications or further communication that way. So it'll be a nice leisurely paddle out to the dam. Sometimes we get to see some eagle nests, you get to meet some neighbors, get to check out the fish ladder that we've mentioned. Starting that weekend as well, unlike the leisurely paddle, we'll have our competitive option. So in the past, our board member, John MacLaine, has actually hosted a paddle competition. So for the month of August, so Saturday, August 1st through Labor Day weekend, we're lucky Labor Day is a little bit later this year. We have more time to compete against one another. We're going to be bringing that challenge back. So there'll be 2 navigational markers that you'll be able to paddle around. We'll have a little website link. That way we can track you. You'll be self-reporting those for us. And yeah, that is going to be open to any human-powered vessel, whether that's a kayak, a paddleboard, a surf ski, anything else that you can think of.
Jet ski?
Jet ski, it's
Yeah.
not, no. Probably not, unless you're like maybe towing it in a kayak or something. That can be your workout. So we will have those different race classes. That way it's fair for everyone. So different boat types, different lengths of boats and paddle boards, different genders. And then our category winners will be able to choose some sort of swag from our HLA arsenal. So whether that's like a t-shirt or a hat that has our logo on it. So keep an eye out on our Facebook page and our newsletters. Tom does such a great letter sending out for more information there. Lastly, we have our pontoon boat tour. So slated for Sunday, August 16th with the following weekend as our rain date. Has everyone actually taken a little tour of the lake? Has everybody done a full loop? Seeing some had yes, some had no. Yeah, so it's a really cool thing to actually be able to do the whole loop. So we've had some folks volunteering to use some of their pontoon boats to transport some of our community members. Like I said on the prior slide, we'll be doing a sign up link on a website. That way we'll be able to more easily navigate who is signing up. And once we have a better handle on that, we'll kind of flesh out the details such as our starting location and where we'll meet up. But you can expect to maybe find some light refreshments like water, some hydrating beverages. Yeah. And if anybody's interested in maybe learning more about that, whether that means going out for a boat ride, I know I like going for a boat ride, or if you're interested in using your own boat, definitely let us know and we'll be around after the meeting if you want to ask any further questions about that. All right, thanks.
It's always tough to follow Lauren. We've had a lot of questions over the last few years on where are we with eagles and loons, so thought we could do it pretty quickly. We've had one eaglet this year. It's been tagged, and it's also fledged. About 10 to 12 days ago, I think it actually fledged. We have no loon chicks, and I don't expect any this year. For whatever reason, they chose not to nest. And there's some, it looked like they started to at one point and then abandoned it. So we don't have loon chicks. Near as I can tell, we don't have much for beavers because the fishway isn't getting plugged like it normally does. And there are times when we have beavers that I can't keep, you have to go there almost every day to undo what they did overnight. But I think most people knew that they built a dam last year, and with the drought that we had, we're required to release a certain amount of water all the time from the lake to keep water in Mill Brook for the trout and for the alewives to leave. But the beavers built their dam upstream from the main dam, and no water was reaching the concrete dam. So we couldn't let any water out. So they held the lake up as low as I showed you the lake was last year. It would have been quite a bit lower if the beavers hadn't built a dam and shut off the flow out of the lake. So they actually helped us. So one of the things that I want to really credit Kevin for doing is he went out, started with Pride Farm, and he was able to get actually Down East Propane to get some group rates, and they were significantly lower. And you can see that the regular rate right now is $3.69, $3.70 a gallon, and the group rate is $2.19, $2.20. And I had looked at that, and my company, Dead River, will match that. But one of the things I just ask you to do, if you swapping from one company to the other, unless you've got a buried tank, is not a big deal. But as you look at them, compare not just the price per gallon, but whether or not they have delivery charges and hazardous material charges, because they're not always the same. And that's really what I just said. Septic pumping, we also were able to get a small discount, $10 to $20 on the septic tank pumping if you get part of a group. So That's worked out pretty well, and, you know, hats off to Kevin for getting that set up at the beginning. The vac truck, I talked a little bit about cleaning settling basins, and we've still got a little bit more work to do on that, but I expect by the end of the year, we'll have something. Okay, 2 questions. I know it's getting late. And people online, if you want to go to the chat, you can add your own piece to there, and Kevin will pick it up. But what things that we're doing would you like to see us do more of? Is the first question.
Dennis, if I want to be part of that group rate thing, who do I contact?
Kevin,
Okay, so
or you know, either Kevin, if you're going, if it's propane and you go to Dead River, just tell him you want to be part of the Highland Lake group. And I've got a letter with the pricing all locked in, and you can do it for up to 3 years.
so we'll put that on the newsletter.
Yep, we'll put that out so that anybody can have easy access to it. Okay, everyone's really happy. That's great. Okay, what are we not doing that you'd like us to do? Maybe make the meeting shorter? You know, okay. Kevin, have you seen anything online? Okay, well, given that, are there any other things that you have questions on that we rushed through tonight that we didn't?
I wasn't sure if I could figure it out when you did the water testing, but there was a post in next door yesterday. Someone said that.
I'm sorry.
It said they had just been Highland Lake, and that there was a lot of dead fish. And I know I was out there with my grandson, but probably did, which I hadn't seen before on the sea. So there's all this back and forth on post with about, I'm sorry, in next door about what could help us. I just don't know if anybody else noticed it. And if anybody wants to surmise, you know, I'm looking at the number of alewives this year, and I'm wondering if there were many more that didn't make it out.
Right.
Or if it's phosphorus, or has anybody thought about this? Because the assumptions we're making of life.
Yeah, I was going to respond to that. I saw that, and it disappeared for some reason. I couldn't find it, but the issue, the question is, on next door, there was a whole series of questions on dead fish that were observed on along the shore, and some people said that, you know, the size of them was pretty small, as I recall. The alewives that come into the lake and leave are somewhere around 11 inches. So those were not adult alewives. I can't tell you what they were because I didn't see them. I haven't seen any dead fish. I mean, it's not, well, I did see one. Sometimes fish that are hooked and released end up being hurt. They'll die. The seagulls or the loons will get them. But I saw that, and I wanted to respond, like I said, and maybe we could talk afterwards and show me what you've seen or link me to it, and we'll see what we can figure out. But has anyone else seen a bunch of dead fish on the shore? One? Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't sound like it's a big issue, but
With turtles,
turtles, snappers would. Yeah.
seems to be pretty good turtles. That's sort of all white birds, but I've grown up on, you know, some of my old life. We used to have a lot of white birds and a lot of yellow. Do we still?
The question was, it seemed like there used to be a lot of white perch and yellow perch in the lake, and there's a lot fewer now. And as I was trying to figure out what to do with alewives, I'd read somewhere that alewives can outcompete white perch. So I pressed the Inland Fish and Wildlife to come down and do a survey, because I knew they'd done them. I have the reports from 2008, 2010, so I knew how many they got then. They put out these nets and called gill nets. The fish will go into it, get stuck, and then they'll pull them up, and I'm not sure how they dispose of them. But my intention was, wow, if they're wiping out if the alewives are wiping out the white perch, maybe we should limit the number coming into the lake. And it ends up, it is loaded with, they had more than, they had more white perch it was 2 years ago, I think, could be 3. They had way more white perch than in either of the 2 prior surveys. They're feeding on the alewives and growing. They got something like 200 white perch, all about a foot long. So, any other questions? Motion to adjourn? Second? Good. Vote? All right.